Добрый день, коллеги! Мы рады вас приветствовать на
Good afternoon, colleagues. We are happy to welcome you to the third International Forum, Responsible Investments in the CIS and Black Sea region. It's the second year that we are having this forum in a digital format, but we are happy that it makes it possible for us to reach a much wider audience and gives our listeners not only the opportunity to participate in real time and ask their questions, but also see the recording later. A few technical notes. We have simultaneous interpretation. You can choose the appropriate language channel by clicking on the globe sign. So you can use Russian, English, or stay on the original soundtrack. We have quite a mixed audience, but more of our listeners speak Russian. Therefore, I will be speaking Russian by default, and I will ask questions in English to English-speaking participants. And this year we have an interactive format, which is very close to our weekly webinars. Therefore, all listeners can see each other in the list and can write in the chat. So please keep your microphones muted and video off in order not to bother the speakers. We will have a break at 11:30 CET for one time, and then we'll have a second session. And I would like to thank the Lipetsk region, Polyus and Russian-German Foreign Trade Chamber for the support of our forum. And I would like to go to our first session, ESG risks and ESG opportunities for business. During this session, we'll speak about ESG barriers for export-oriented businesses, about the CBAM effects, and also about responsible investment and ESG banking. We'll start with a few introductory slides, and then we will get down to a live discussion with the speakers, among which we have Jean-Claude Knebeler, Aris, Florian Willershausen, Alexander Chaychits, Alexey Bogomolov, and Ivan Barsola. And I will later introduce each of the speakers to you. Just a couple of introductory slides. We show this one quite often at our different events, and that's screening of green and responsible finance practices in the CAC and Black Sea region. We are happy to see an increasing number of green dots with each half a year. Green dots showed the presence of such practices, and red indicate the absence of such practices. In all countries of the region, there are already green initiatives. Among development banks, there are green or sustainable loans. Many countries have green bonds available. The banks are gradually joining the banking network for green financial systems, and there are also initiatives by central banks. We also keep a ESG ranking of Russian companies. We are more focused on ESG practices of Russian companies, but in the future we plan to expand this database to other countries of the region. We currently have 155 Russian companies from 24 different sectors in the database. We have an integrated ESG assessment with more than 100 indicators, and we have an overall ranking. As a table, you can see green rating bank and yellow rating bank and red rating bank, showing the level of susceptibility of companies to ESG risks and how they use their opportunities. For a long time, our market looked more like a pyramid. Yeah, and the green top of the pyramid was increasing very slowly, but now we are happy to see that we are in this reassessment stage that is going to be finished by mid-March. We will see a significant increase in the yellow band, in the yellow range, and I think that's a positive signal of improvements in the Russian companies. We also have a Telegram channel where we publish news on sustainable development, and there you can also learn about our current events. And with that, I'm finishing my introductory slides, and we get down to a live discussion. Our first speaker will be Ben Aris. He speaks English, therefore I will switch to English now.
Now, I would like to start with our first speaker, Ben Aris, editor-in-chief of BNE Intellinews, English-speaking media source on Eurasia and Eastern Europe. So, Ben, I'm glad to see you for the third time on our forum. It's a good tradition already.
Yes.
First question to you. What is your view on market disturbances created by ESG risks, in particular additional costs and barriers, for example, from CBAM for companies from the region?
Добрый день, коллеги. Я говорю по-русски, но не очень.
Yeah, I speak English, but my Russian is not very good.
The whole process of
So we'll speak.
CBAM is a work in progress, and the EU proposals are going to cause significant costs to many businesses. And Russia is in the firing line here as being one of the countries that's going to be hit the most. The new regulations are going to cost, according to assessment by Fitch, 600 million euros of taxes through to 2035. And that compares with China, which is going to get hit by 200 million, and the US by only 25 million. So for Russia, there's going to be significant changes, and the companies are already starting to take that on board and investing in trying to clean their act up. And focusing on Russia for the moment, it's an interesting example because most of the ESG moves that have been made so far have been led by the corporate sector. And that goes back to a few years ago, in fact, 10 years ago, the Norwegian state pension fund banned its pension funds from holding shares of companies with poor ESG scores. Norilsk Nickel was particularly hard hit by this, a big emitter, one of the most polluted cities in the world. And they started investing heavily because they lost something like a third of their investors because of that one decision. And they've been, I mean, the CFO told me that they've invested already $2 billion in cutting emissions. They've started closing down some of the plants because they have a big problem with emitting sulfur dioxide, not carbon dioxide in particular. And they have now a 5-year plan where they're going to invest another 3.5 billion. And if you look across the sectors, companies are reacting. That Norwegian decision was a real shock. Rusal, the aluminium maker, which is another one that's going to be hit by CBAM, has also now divided its businesses and put all the aluminium, the dirty emitting part of their business, in one holding, and put all the clean assets in another holding, a separate one. And as far as the market's concerned, that actually is a good move in so much as the valuation of the two parts of the company now combined has become more valuable. And from a market perspective, that one of the problems these companies faces, and the real CFO was saying to me, is that we don't earn any alpha if we're clean, if we're green, if we have a good ESG score. We don't get rewarded. Our share price doesn't go up. So at the moment, these investments, what they do is they prevent the share price going down or getting banned by certain fund managers like state pension funds. The one exception to that may be Enel Russia, which is a power company, and they've got rid of all of their coal production, coal-fired plants. And although the revenue the company generates has been reduced as a result of that, and they're investing heavily in green and renewable energies, the share price has actually performed much better. And that's pretty much the first example of a company that's adopted a radical green strategy and has seen its share price improve. But on the whole, while investors now, who are driven by retail investors who are demanding sustainable as well as profitable investments, so the appetite for green investments is getting stronger. but the effects it's having on share prices and what have you is still limited. I mean, you take the green bonds business. Poland was the first one to bring out the first ever sovereign green bond several years ago. But the number of green bonds as a percentage of the total fixed income sovereign issued remains tiny. So this whole thing is right at the beginning. The CBAM regulations, when they come in, are going to drive up costs. And for something like the Russian power sector, analysts are already worried that the profits from that sector might be entirely consumed by the investments that are needed in order to pass the barrier for those regulations. So they're starting to price this in, but really this is only a sort of phenomenon of the last 6 months or so that people are starting to take account. There's too many pieces missing. There's no real carbon market. I mean, the cost of carbon at the moment is sort of around $50 per ton, and that's not being fully priced in. The analysts are only starting to try and assess the costs of this. And the whole process, I think, is going to go much slower. The CBAM regulations, they cover sectors that produce 45% of the emissions, but the actual costs of the EU imports is only 3.2% of total EU imports are going to be affected by CBAM. So what difference it makes overall is not clear, and the rate of reduction in emissions that the EU has set for this Fit for 55 target, which is part of the Green Deal, again, is going about half as fast as it should do. So it looks like the EU is going to miss these targets, although they're already talking about ramping it up. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's not really a functioning carbon market. There's not really a lot of clarity on the regulations. There's an expectation that the regulations will be tightened faster than proposed because they're already running behind. And companies are left in the meantime trying to plan for this whole scenario, which is not clear at all. But as I said, in Russia in particular, the corporates have taken the lead, and particularly the ones with equity investors. I mean, those are the ones who are being goaded into doing this because they can see the demand amongst their big investors for sustainable and green investments. The last thing I'll say is one of the problems that we've already seen come up is the problem of greenwashing. Again, referring to Norilsk, who have and were early in making big investments that added significantly to their costs without bringing anything to the top line, nor the equity price. But they had, of course, this huge oil spill up in the north. And while they have been investing heavily in green aspects of their business, it appears that they were told this tank full of oil was unsafe, and they haven't invested anything into it, despite being warned 2 years before to do something about it. And so the company is being accused of not taking their environmental obligations quite seriously enough. And that may be, I don't know, an oversight on the company, or maybe a not full commitment to doing root and branch investments. It's more selective. They picked out the things that are really offensive, like these metal plants kicking out lots of sulfur dioxide, and closed them down. But it testifies to the fact that this whole process is just beginning, and companies are reacting rather than substantially planning to and transform their businesses so that they're completely green. And maybe NL, as the example at the other end of the scale, is the only company that really has root and branch changed its business from top to bottom to be absolutely green. So I think I'll stop at that point.
Thanks, Ben. What do you think about ESG risks in relation to geopolitical risks in this region? So geopolitical risks in the CIS and Black Sea region are so high. How do you think it affects attention to ESG risks? Do companies take ESG risks seriously and take it as an opportunity to cover up for high geopolitical risks? Or do they drop efforts because the geopolitical risks are so high that you can't compensate for them? What's your view?
Talking to companies in the region at the moment, they all have now, I mean, there's been a huge mindset. We've been talking about this subject ESG for about 2 years. I mean, it was launched in Eastern Europe at the SPIEF conference, I think in 2020, where it went onto the agenda. And in the meantime, particularly in the last year, it's gone shooting up the agenda to be really important to everyone. Everyone understands they have to do something about it. And the same with the Kremlin, who wasn't taking it particularly seriously. However, in about the last year, they've now come out with pretty radical plans. You know, they're working actively on it. So I think companies see it as a risk and they are now actively investing. But as I say, they're still coming off square one. However, when you put the ESG risks up against the geopolitical risks, then there's no comparison. The geopolitical risks now are huge. I mean, shooting up. I mean, I've been saying the current standoff between the West and Russia over this NATO expansion thing is on a par with Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, we have troop movements and that's dominating everything. I mean, the market just sold off. It's all its gains from last year. It's back now down to where it was in the Crimean sanction period following that, 2014 to 2018, with no sign of recovering. Lots of war talk, although we actually discount that completely. We think there's going to be no invasion. However, there is going to be a lot of saber rattling until Putin gets his no expansion deal. And I think he will continue to escalate until he gets that deal. And he's prepared to go to the point where he doesn't get a deal and breaks off relations completely. And then you're back into a Cold War scenario with China and Russia on one side and the West on the other. And Russia's investment case will be radically altered. The ability for investors to go into Russia will be radically reduced. And in that sense, we need to resolve this geopolitical crisis before we can even think about how ESG risks affect company valuations. And if a deal is done, then there should be a rapid bounce back, a rapid recovery, because Russia as a market is incredibly cheap at the moment. Companies are earning massive profits. They're paying the highest dividend yields in the world by a factor of 2 or 3. And so investors are extremely keen to buy Russian assets. Everyone was overweight. But this geopolitical tension's just taken over the agenda. And it remains to be seen how it will be played out. The first round of diplomacy should come to an end this week when Blinken gives Lavrov his written reply to Russia's demands that were issued in December. There'll probably be a second round. I'm expecting a Putin-Biden summit after this letter is delivered because the news on that letter will not be good. At which point, again, there's an opportunity to resolve this. And if that brings nothing, then as I say, I think Putin intends to keep ratcheting up the tensions until he gets what he wants, or he will break off relations completely.
Thanks. Let's hope for the good that geopolitical,
yes.
geopolitical tension will go down. But do you think there is something how sustainable companies from the region can signal that they are out of politics and go through this barrier that investors don't want to invest?
They've been trying to do that for years. I mean, again, talking to corporates, Softline is a good example. It's a leading tech company that does cloud services for corporates, a Russian-founded one with half its business in Russia. And it has been actively trying to internationalize its business. So it's been very active in South America, in Africa, in other emerging markets, Brazil. And now it sells itself as an international company. And actually, if you mentioned that they're Russian, the PR then write to you and complain and say, look, we're not Russian, we're international now. The trouble is that as far as investors are concerned, you know, it remains Russia. And they get tarred with the Russia risk, which is in addition to the normal emerging market risk. And nobody's really been able to shake off that additional special risk that's associated with Russian assets. And it costs. I mean, the PE ratios on Russian stocks are typically in single figures, whereas you look at India or China, they're in double figures. and this remains a problem. And until the current crisis started, that was starting to change, particularly with the, particularly with all the tech stocks. There's been a boom of IPOs in the last year. And those tech stocks that have been listing in London and New York have been getting tech valuations because the tech business is essentially a global business. If you have success in one country, particularly a big country like Russia, it's assumed that that will spread worldwide. And so in the tech sector, they were becoming internationalized, getting rid of this Russia risk. But then you take the raw material producers like Rosneft, Gazprom, Norilsk, Rusal, with the bulk of their assets in Russia. I mean, they haven't been able to shake this off. ESG was a way, actually a platform for them to be able to get rid of some of that Russia risk, because we're talking about a global program here to provide commodities globally and to work them into a global system where carbon costs are taken into account, where emissions and ESG is taken into account. And these barriers, the CBAM barriers, will actually benefit that, because actually the really big loser from CBAM is the poor countries, particularly Africa. Or somewhere like Bosnia and Herzegovina, I mean, 72% of its exports are to the EU, which is largely steel and aluminium. And they're going to have to pay much higher tariffs because they haven't got the money to invest in the tech to clean their act up. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. However, the Russian companies do have the money and have been investing in that. The steel sector in Ukraine is another one that's going to be a problem because, again, they lack the money to make the investments. But the Russians are going to, the steel industry, sorry, is going to have to invest something like $144 million. But they have that money and they're going to do that, which means they can produce some of the greenest steel in Europe, still at a very cheap price. And that will drive exports and that will drive customers to them. And in that sense, CBAM is an advantage, a competitive advantage for Russian businesses, because they will be able to distinguish themselves from their competitors in other low cost markets who are also supplying these commodities. But like I say, all of that's off the agenda. I mean, the companies are carrying on with that strategy on the assumption that things will get better. This is not the first crisis we've been through. But as I say, I'm seriously worried about where this one will go, because I think Putin's dug his heels in, and I really think it could lead to a radical transformation of Russia's investment case, similar to Crimea, but worse. But in the meantime, the companies have to hope for the best, and they're continuing to make the investments. And in that sense, they've embraced ESG and the investments that come with it, which is a good thing.
Thanks. Yes, taking crisis as an opportunity was always our strong part. So hopefully this crisis will also be an opportunity.
The Chinese character for crisis is one part opportunity and one part disaster. So I mean, I think Russia's Asian enough to have embraced that idea.
Yes, hopefully. So we will move on. Thank you, Ben. We will move on to our second speaker, Jean-Claude Knebeler. Jean-Claude is head of Sustainable Development Department at the International and Comparative Law Research Center. Jean-Claude, the first question for you: how do you think institutional consensus and trust in ESG can be built?
Well, there are two factors that you need to consider here in the question. There's one, there's an internal trust between institutions and the wider society. And looking the Russian case, that's a tough one, because there's not really a tradition of trust between institutions, between government and the people and society. Generally speaking, the government doesn't really trust the people don't really trust the government, and people don't really trust each other either. And that is only very slowly changing. So everything that has to do with virtuous programs like ESG is difficult to communicate. Still, there are islands of hope, I would say, because the green agenda is actually driven bottom up in many ways. If you look at the past 10 years, civil society movements, contestation demonstrations that exist in Russia and sometimes are successful. The fields where they were successful and actually got the authorities to react were very often in the field of the environment, where the leadership of the regions, leadership of the federation has understood that this is a demand of society, that everybody wants to breathe cleaner air, have cleaner water and cleaner foodstuffs, that this is something that is fully in their responsibility as regulators, and that any shortcomings in this field cannot be blamed on some outside forces. So there has been a slow awakening to this, and we now see the beginning of a trend that is, as Ben said before, has been pushed initially by the corporate sector, but is now being taken up by the administration, by government, where there is a lot of work in drafting a very complicated policy framework, a regulatory framework, but still it's not easy. As we said before, as Ben said before, the corporate, especially the big listed companies, have been the drivers of creating the frameworks and of communicating the need for change, because they had to talk to mostly their international investors and explain what they were doing and do so in a credible and understandable way. So they set the stage. And now we see the smaller companies, those who are mainly listed on the Moscow exchange, having mainly Russian investors, but also communicating to society as a whole. They are now following suit. And I think this is a slow process. Even in Europe, it's not easy. If you look at what is going on within the European Union after the publishing of the latest iteration of the EU taxonomy, on the 31st of December, somewhere around 10 o'clock in the evening, I would say that institutional trust between member states and the EU Commission is not very high at the moment. And if we see popular discontent also there, the relationship between society and governments is kind of broken. It is just a wider trend that we are observing. So rebuilding this trust has to go through clear communications from everyone involved, but also through verification by independent agencies, public, private, doesn't really matter, but really independently minded and following clear processes, who audit what the private sector, what corporates are claiming to do, so that we will have less greenwashing, that we will have clearer and more comparable data, that also retail investors who want to invest in targets that they perceive as sustainable and less harmful to their own environment, that they know what to do and what they can follow.
Thanks. What is your view on sustainability regulations? Do you think that a stringent national level regulation would be beneficial, or markets can take care of sustainability and ESG issues? As we see from European experience, the regulation is coming, but still it's coming relatively softly. So what do you think about CIS, Black Sea markets? Do they need the strict regulation or a soft way?
The countries of the CIS and the Black Sea region are so diverse that I don't really see a common approach coming here. Even those that are members in the Eurasian Economic Union have been struggling for a long time to align their regulatory frameworks. So common approach is going to be very difficult. In the European Union, I mean, it took time, of course, because getting 28, 27 aligned is not an easy task, with all the different national and corporate interests to take into account. The same is happening in a large country like Russia, where there's also a lot of pulling in different directions. But if the European example can tell us anything, it is that once the process is engaged, it's very hard to stop it. And I would not necessarily say that it's been slow. We were mentioning CBAM before. The initial idea for something CBAM-like is, I think, celebrating its sixth anniversary next week, because it was down to a letter that was sent on, I think, 5th of February 2016 by a number of ministers of the economy of steel-making European nations, asking for protection against those dirty Chinese and Russians who are flooding apparently the European market with their cheap steel. And one of the ideas proposed in this letter was a carbon border tax. Now, well, 6 years, and we have something that is actively discussed, and where we expect like a final draft later this year that is going then to make it into the implementation stage. So I don't think that that's slow for a large entity, a large party like the European Union. Same in Russia. If I look at the situation like 2 years ago, when I was talking to senior bankers and business leaders in Russia, most did not really believe that this sustainability issue would go very far. But this changed very quickly, and I think in Russia it's a top-down thing to a large degree, because there was one person who seemingly changed his mind about the reality of climate change and the urgency of working on the topic. President Putin started to talk about green finance in, I think, 2019 at the Russia Calling Conference at length. And I think that gave a lot of corporate leaders food for thought, and told them that, well, there is going to be certain urgency to implement things, not only because of Western investors demand so, but something's brewing domestically, and there will be regulation. Plus then, I mean, the Norilsk nickel incident was mentioned, showing that there was not only the carrot of improved investor interest in sustainability motivated listings, but that there was also the stick of the national overseers, the national regulators, who, I mean, Norilsk got a fine of historical dimensions. And probably the others in the sector understood that this might not be a unique experience, but that this could be the new norm.
Thanks, Jean-Claude. I agree. Slow probably was not the best word here to describe the situation. I think probably gradual would feel better. What I was trying to say, sometimes when we see regulatory changes in Russia, they come instantly, and you feel that not always proper discussion with all stakeholders was done. So it's changing the landscape.
It's, yeah, the bear seems to sleep very often, and then it starts running at impressive speed very quickly. It's not something that goes through many stages. I agree, but there is a lot of discussion. I mean, I am astonished at the number of working groups that are being run by different organizations. Bewildering. And for somebody who did not grow up within the Russian system, it is sometimes even hard to understand who is doing what now, to what end, and with whom. But there is a lot of consultation. I think that the authorities, the presidential administration, the government staff, and the different ministries are actually working a lot with private sector expertise, very often informally, not through formalized consultations, but informally, just because a lot of the highly paid experts are outside of government, and government just relies on them and says, you know, can you please write some kind of white paper that we can use for our own, you know, to make our own ideas. And then it's a question of arbitrage about, you know, how you play off different interests against another and which direction you go to. Plus, we have to take into account the international context, talking about geopolitics before. I believe, and I keep believing, that even with the background of my previous job in mind, that the fight against climate change and the protection of our environment is a global challenge that we all need to approach together. And that is something that is understood, at least in public. So that, for example, there is no way that we can successfully contain increasing global temperatures without changes in Russia. And actually helping Russia become more greener and more sustainable can be done at quite impressively lower cost than reducing CO2 emissions at to the same level in more mature economies like Europe or the United States. So there should be there should definitely be a closer cooperation between, say, the European Union and Russia in the fight against climate change, but the current geopolitical situation prevents it. And that means that everybody's cooking his soup in his own kitchen when we should be working together on the banquet, because there are now one main rule maker or perceived rule maker, which is the Commission in Brussels. And the discussions with those who are supposed to be the rule takers, like the Russian Federation, other countries of Central Asia, but also China, are not involved as much as they should be if we want this to become a successful endeavor. Imposing a fait accompli on them, especially one that is perceived as hostile, like CBAM, and it is hostile, it is just protectionism, will not go down very well and will not stimulate further cooperation in the future.
That's actually a good point. You partly answered the next question, but how do you think this international cooperation can be fostered? So, for example, for CBAM, Russian companies did not submit quite a lot of feedback. I think that was 5 or 6 letters of feedback regarding CBAM, but actually the feedback field was open for everyone. So more companies affected or potentially affected or having opinion about it could have expressed it.
I think that, well, the limited feedback by the Russian Federation, by the official feedback, I think had also to do with timing, because I think the deadline for feedback was sometime in September, and the order to write or write up what is called the Russian policy consensus on this topic was given by the Prime Minister sometime, just in the beginning of September. Everybody came back from their August holidays, and it's probably still slow getting it together. So I think that might have been part of it. But also, I mean, there is an understanding. CBAM came from a protectionist mindset. So this was not meant initially as a tool for cooperation. It got hijacked a little bit by the green lobby in Brussels, and transformed into something where the steel lobby, Eurofer, who was at the birth of it, who helped to conceive the idea, is actually today horrified about the outcome that was produced. But we'll have to see what comes of it, because both the European Union is still working on shaping CBAM. Russia is actually doing what they should do and using this threat on the horizon to affect and push some changes domestically, setting up the carbon market, helping companies to become greener and more sustainable, building and promoting green finance instruments. So there's a lot that's going to happen domestically. And once this is ready, I think we can approach the CBAM question with a lot more peace of mind. Because if certain exemptions in it are going to be maintained and Russia can build the institutions and the markets that are required to qualify those, then the bill might not be as heavy as it could be. Because actually the performance of Russian companies is not that bad. Today, your average ton of steel is produced with less CO2 emissions per ton in Russia than it is in the European Union, at least by the leading producers, because they have already over the last 20 years invested heavily in their production tools, which was maybe because of cost and tax reasons not done in many of the European plants.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. So we will move now to the next speaker, Florian Willershausen. Florian is the head of AAB Green Finance Workstream. So this is an association of European business. And he also works for Creon Capital as a Chief Development Officer. Florian will be answering questions in Russia, so I will form his questions in Russian as well. Флориан, как вы считаете, иностранный бизнес, работающий в СНГ, следует тем же...
Florian, CIS business follows the same rules as the EU does, or is it a soft line?
Good afternoon, Svetlana. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here, at least digitally, maybe in person next time, in a face-to-face meeting. The question is whether European companies follow Russian standards in Russia. Yes, they're not as strict, but all European companies have set quite ambitious standards for themselves and values about how they do their business outside the EU. And that also started in the Russian context long before everybody understood what ESG was about. One example, the VW plant, the first large-scale plant of a European car maker in Russia. They have a plant in Kaluga, and they make sure that any car produced in Kaluga can be exported to the EU because it meets all quality standards. And this is what Continental and other makers do. So you organize a high level of control and training for your staff so that everybody follows global standards. So this is common. This is present in many European companies for many years now. And that goes for the ESG too, even though the ESG standards in Russia can be weak at the moment, but all European companies are enforcing their standards throughout the world in their activities. And the S component in Russia is not so difficult to achieve because we have quite a good practice in Russia what concerns social responsibility among companies, because it's a tradition that goes back to the Soviet times. As for G, governance, that is corporate regulations and laws, and the compliance policies. What is more difficult, obviously, is to ensure the compliance with environmental responsibility standards. It's not because they don't want to or because they think they can take it easy in Russia, but as Ben said, many of these processes are just starting in Russia, and companies in Russia are motivated to work more in terms of the environmental responsibility. And our oil and gas companies ranking shows that we see that they're investing, and we also heard about the example of Norilsk Nickel here. But I'll give you a different example. For example, companies like PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Danone, Nestle, their headquarters, they gave instructions to their overseas companies, to companies working outside the EU, that any yogurt cup, for example, must be 60, 70, 80% or made of recycled material. Okay, but it's good. But what do you do if this recycled material is not available on the market because you don't have enough sorting, or the sorting is of poor quality, or the companies that can produce this recycled plastic they do it in accordance with the in accordance with health standards that are not compliant with Russian laws. So that may be a limitation. So sometimes such requirements are hard to enforce because the market is only forming, and recycling is a topic that will be coming stronger or in the years to come. But just to make a conclusion for the time being, of course, one can buy these recycled plastic granules from abroad, but it would be a bit strange in the context of this discussion that you have to order a truckload diesel driven by diesel to bring this raw material from Germany or France to Russia. Okay, it may be a short-term solution to achieving corporate goals, but a more long-term solution would be for the companies to invest themselves or to create a demand on the Russian market. And this is what's going to be happening now. And I see a great potential in that sense, and opportunities for not just for European businesses, European companies working in Russia in adhering to high ESG standards, but also for the Russian companies that cooperate with them and work in Russia as partners and suppliers to European businesses and vice versa. Thank you, Florian. In our ranking, we do not just assess Russian companies, but also European companies working in Russia that have Russian subsidiaries. And we see a certain non-transparency of practices. Quite often, this non-financial disclosure, it covers the entire group of companies, and it's hard to distinguish whether the same practices are applied in all countries or what practices are enforced or applied in Russia, what kind of emissions. So can be made, they say like 70% of employees are happy with their work worldwide, whether they're 70% in Europe or 70% in each country. So from our side, maybe the feedback to the signals of European business is that European businesses already put forward serious requirements to their activities in Russia, but they do not manifest them very well in their reporting. And then talking about requirements, what kind of additional ESG requirements do European companies have to their partners in the CIS countries and Black Sea region countries and to the countries they work in? Of course, you need to look at the particular sector or product. People who want a short-term relationship with the Russian supplier, that can be done if it doesn't, if it's in line with the laws, like the EU Regulation Act that this is standard for processing plants or furniture factories like IKEA. So that means that if you don't comply with these requirements without the proper certification, you cannot work with suppliers. They don't have such certification. But that's a requirement from companies because they are afraid of being controlled about EU TR, and that's an important role for the ESG standard. For the time being, it's more voluntary, but it's becoming more and more a regulatory requirement in the EU, and there will be penalties, and everybody's afraid of that. Therefore, now all large companies require from them, their long-term suppliers from Russia, they require from them more stringent standards, and we can expect that this will become even more stringent in the future, and it doesn't only apply to Russian suppliers, but also suppliers from other countries, and to European companies working in Russia. And secondly, it has to do with the fact how tough the regulator will be in responding to these issues, how tough they will be on enforcing ESG standards. I think there are many uncertainties about the CBAM. We don't know how to prepare for the unknown. We don't know what the rules will be, how much it will cost. Just Jean-Claude said that metals companies in Russia are really very competitive, and that is so, and that applies to aluminum manufacturers in Russia too. If they benchmark them against them a dirty plant in Europe, and that they have nothing to worry about in Russia. And if we look at different research about the cost of CBAM, these figures are not very frightening, but we can expect that there will be many underwater stones, because you would need to know the footprint about the company's CO2 emissions, and you will need to have a concept about reducing them. You will need to have a long-term strategy to become a zero emissions company. And it doesn't only apply to obvious polluters, but it also applies to those who may become the victims or subjects of CBAM regulations, and that applies to everyone. And that's a trend that we're going to see. And Ben said in the very beginning that such sustainable development strategy, improving ESG performance, and it will be supported by investment in specific green technology. This is what the participants of the financial sectors want to see, and this is very well seen when we talk about investments by the pension funds. There are not that many European pension funds that invest in Russia, in Russian companies in general, and let alone now. So therefore, I see a great potential on the financial market for funding Russian companies through green financial products. Currently, there is a demand in Europe for specific verified projects of companies with green strategies. So there is more demand than supply on that market in Europe now. And we already see in Luxembourg that companies can raise cheaper financing via green bonds than via classic bonds. So this costs nothing for for European companies, but it's different for for Russian companies to get access to the European green financing market. and it depends on the Russia Central Bank rates. So there is a great potential, but I wouldn't say that Russian companies have to observe and listen to what their buyers in euros say. They also have to be guided by their own interests and follow their own, develop their own strategy of decarbonization in order to anticipate or preempt rather than react to the difficulties that will come up from the regulators. Yeah, that's a very correct comment. Thank you very much, Florian. You really complemented my question about how you can signal your attractiveness to foreign investors. So going to foreign exchanges is an excellent signal. If we continue the signals vein, our next speaker is ESG communication manager of Polyus, Alexander Chaychits. Alexander.
Hi, colleagues. Over 10 years, Polyus has been introducing sustainable principles
has
in
been
its
implementing
business,
investments,
which was recognized by high ESG
sustainable
ratings.
development principles for the
Please
past
tell
10
us
years, and that
more
has received very
about
positive
new
feedback
quality
from
achievements of the
investors.
company
Please tell
in
us
terms
how
of
this
new
has led to
opportunities
new
as well
opportunities related
as
to
improved ratings.
sustainable development.
Thank you very much. For us, sustainability is has been a talk we've started a long time ago. Sustainability is not a recent trend. We have it for several decades, and international investment community is aware about it. We are not having a long track when in ESG, this topic is not new for us. I have a couple of slides to show you. Can you see my screen? Polyus is a public company. And I will tell you about our specific approach to sustainability and its driving effect on communications with investors. A couple of words about our experience in IR relations based on ESG. I think that some major lines in IR communications are true for all companies, for all businesses. If you have vendors, ESG will come to your relations with them. Polyus is the largest gold miner in Russia. We have assets in Siberia and in Russia's Far East since 2013. Production volumes went up substantially. Talking on our sustainability approach, we have a very low carbon footprint compared to other miners due to process specifics of gold production, as gold production requires less emissions. We're benefiting from this compared to our to peer companies. CBAM regulations don't apply to Polyus. Our emissions are low both specifically and absolutely. We have a pretty good track record in mitigating our carbon footprint. Last year, we switched to renewable energy sources by 100%, and this required quite a lot of standing over several years. Now we are preparing a climate strategy, which will be our guideline for several years in energy transition. We have 20,000 staff members for regions of operations, which means that Polyus has a lot of impact on these regions, and due to this, we have to be responsible and to move proactively in our regions of operation. We have one of the best HSE risk management systems. Historically, we had a low track record of occupational incidents. Now, this system is exposed by pandemics. However, we try to overcome these challenges. Speaking of the board of directors, we try to be transparent and independent. Out of 9, we have 4 independent directors, which is nearly 50%. We have an independent chairperson and independent chairpersons of the committee. Polyus is a public company. Our stock is on a free float, nearly 22%. Our stock is both on the Moscow Stock Exchange and London Stock Exchange. We have both Russian and international investors who are increasingly keen about ESG. I agree with Ben and Jean-Claude, who said that ESG is driven by public concern. This concern has accumulated for quite a long period of time as society became increasingly aware of climate change issues, and business realized that it has to play their role in this. And several years transition, the quality of transition increased drastically, and business responsibility went up. We used to talk with the government about ESG and sustainable development, discussing regulations and legal framework. ESG and sustainability used to be also a subject for discussion with the civil society. And out of the blue, investors came and engaged in this discussion. Historically, their role was not main. Their role in this discussion was relatively minor. It was not mainstream. We need to be aware that such approach has a restricted scale. Now all investors concerned about ESG. They have this ESG issue, kind of a criteria you ultimately need to meet. No ESG, all ESG graphs underestimate the relevance of this metrics. over the past years, we improved our vision of ESG disclosures. In particular, we participate in a number of ESG ratings, which is a very good tool to identify gaps and to benchmark against peers. They're kind of indicating the community's expectations. Helping us to visualize our gaps, and this is quite a successful tool. It was easy at the beginning, as it was a low-hanging fruit, but the process has started, and we are moving on. Talking of risks, our business is relatively simple, so probably what I am going to say will be will look very simple. Any company, private or public, needs to follow these principles, as they are a must. First, if you do not go sustainable, you do not get investments. Sustainability doesn't mean sustainable inflow of money or sustainable finance. Sustainability means sustainable environmental, social, and corporate parameters. Sustainable ESG is a must, and you cannot stay unchanged. You need to progress. This is a number one rule for everyone to follow. We see investors pushing more and more about ESG. You get no loans if you are not sustainable, because green finance is quite a trend now. It applies both to green financing, green bonds, which means spending on some green initiative. This also applies to loans in general, as you need to be sustainable to get bank credits. In 5 years, I can see that this will part of any bank loans. Alexander, I'm sorry, we are short of time. Investors' expectations are increasingly getting up, and they are more and more detailed. Investors' expectations drive up expectations of other stakeholders and vice versa. You have the government, you have the community, you have the stakeholders, and they're listening to each other, they communicate. Talking of opportunities, it's hard to say, as we do not have many of them. You need to be aware that ESG, probably you've heard the idea that ESG is good for your investment. You look more appealing in terms of for investors. It's not quite true. For example, if you improve the structure of your board of directors, this should have an effect. Diversity in the board should be a good driver. So we need to invest in people, we need to invest in the nature. Probably your business is more sustainable than it seems. That is the good news. When we started to review our business from the investor's perspective, we saw that we have to do a lot of things. But then we realized that many good things are already in place, have already been in place. But probably the thing we needed to fix was communication. Probably you need to take a look from a different angle. And ESG is going to stay. If you are in the leading position, your communication with the government and with community will improve. I'm nearly done. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. Should you have any questions for Alexander, we'll forward them to Alexander. I'm giving the floor now to the next speaker, representing investors, Alexey Bogomolov, head of investment programs in RSHB. Alexey, please tell us more about communication with the ESG funds, benefits and drawbacks.
And participants of this conference. Thank you very much for inviting Russian Agricultural Bank Asset Management Arm to this conference, as it really gives an opportunity to speak on the same topic with our colleagues from European Union, and also to demonstrate that Russia is progressing quite intensively in this field. I would like to specifically focus on how ESG ETFs, which were launched by Russian Agricultural Bank, opening doors for ESG world. For us, that was really a conscious and strategic decision to develop these products in Russia with Russian securities under Russian law, and that was pioneering and quite difficult task. We started this quite early in 2018-19, understanding how Russian FIs and market participants can follow this trend and of responsible investments. Of course, we use our personal experience developing this ESG at international banks, which operate in Russia and CIS and Black Sea area. And we have quite a number of staff within our company who were really doing this, including myself, both at ABN AMRO and BNP Paribas, who are leaders in this area in European Union. We decided to do a feasibility study, and our attention was, of course, to capturing and cultivation of domestic investors, their growing interest in sustainable and new products. We analyzed which forms of collective investment in Russia could be used for ESG, with ESG criteria and philosophy. We held consultations on ESG principles with major international players and infrastructure participants. And of course, we took this as an initiative within Russian Agriculture Bank, for which it sustainable development and investments are, I would say, natural. Of course, to do this job, we need to understand which mutual funds could be used for such a product, and we decided to launch ETF. That was our first ETF for the company and the first EEG ETF for investors. It also was important to diversify our investment products for our clients and to develop further our international cooperation with partners of RSHB Asset Management. We started to set up partnership with Russian Union of Industrial and Entrepreneurs who were really ahead of everybody in setting up and calculation sustainability indexes. And important that these indexes are done in accordance with international practice, ISO 26000, UNCTAD, and they're audited by international auditors. We also held consultation with Moscow Exchange for usage of the joint product with RSPP, and there was a positive reply at the end of 2019. So we set up a program and working group and launched our first EGTF in June 2020. It was not an easy task taking into account lockdown and pandemic already in place, and there were a lot of legal issues to be resolved, including usage of these indices. And we also, from the very beginning, decided that this product should be really in accordance with international practice. Therefore, we decided to have a ESG rating. We analyzed which rating agency in Russia and abroad could do it, and we selected RAEX for this job. And the first rating was given to us in December 2020. So from the very beginning, we decided that this product should be without any possibility of accusing greenwashing, and we stand on this now. Later, we also found hard currency interest for responsible investments in Russia, and we decided to work out new Eurobond index for Russian companies which adhere to ESG principle, and that new index was approved by Moscow Exchange also in December 2020. The second ESG ETF was for Russian Eurobond, and it was launched in April 2021. We also received ESG rating for the second fund in September 2021. For promotion of ESG ETF, which is very important subject in our agenda, is education and cultivation of investors is the main area for this exercise. We use all mass media, social media channels, interviews and articles with major Russian newspapers. We used webinars at CBAM, InvestHouse, and we organized our own in-house interviews with experts from Russian companies which are in our portfolio. Actually, the first portfolio for equities has 26 issues, and for Eurobonds we have 15 issues right now. We also specialized conferences and forum, invest funds, ecology, PF, MICA, Brand LG, C-bonds, and so on.
Apologies,
Also,
Alexey. Just a reminder, 2 minutes. left.
This also opens our for us cooperation with Luxembourg Green Exchange, Hong Kong Stock Exchange, international asset managers and banks, international universities such as University of Perugia and so on. We are now member of consultative group of BRICS, and at BRICS, Russia became initiator of setting up new index, sustainability G index, and that was our initiative. And later we team up with South African experts who are really strong in this area. And now this idea proved, and it is an annual report which was published under Indian presidency. What is important, of course, is recognition of our role in this area. We've got a couple of honored diplomas, and our rating of the company, which was rated by NRA, was also upgraded due to diversification of our business through ESG ETF. Our ESG ETF are included in issue manual, which was prepared by Big Four for Moscow Exchange 2021. We do not stop at this with these two ESG ETF, and we decided to work on a new initiative of index for climate change for Russia. And climate change is becoming more and more important globally, and I would say ESG agenda is shifting towards climate change, which is acute, and that's we signed agreement with European University of St. Petersburg, with Perugia University, and we are starting our work on new index, climate change index for Russia.
Thank you, Alexey. In chat, you can find the links to ESG assessments of both ETFs explained by Alexey. They serve as a great picture of portfolio diversification on ESG risks. You can see matrices of materialities of different risk exposures, which serve as a very useful indication how also private investors can picture their investments and ESG risks. Last but not least, we switch to the next speaker, Ivan Barsola, исполнительный директор ESG дирекции ПАО Sberbank.
This is Ivan Barsola, Executive Director of ESG Directorate of Sberbank. Ivan, please join us. I think we will overrun this session for a few minutes, but Ivan will speak very briefly about major ESG covenants used by Sberbank, what kind of covenants is going to be used, and what kind of ESG KPIs can be used to attract responsible financing. I think this is a question that concerns all our companies in the ranking.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm glad to see many people who were met before, and I'm even more glad that there are many new people here. My congratulations to RAEX bringing together so many participants interested in the ESG. I will try to answer the question asked by Svetlana. And for this, I would like to outline 3 factors. First, what do we do? Second, what ESG covenants are? And third, what next? First, what an ESG covenant is. Normally, the central subject of the discussion is the terminology. We have some 150 companies in Russia who has been dealing with ESG for a long time. Alexander mentioned being in ESG for over 10 years, but it is important to say that dozens of companies are not in the game yet. I mean, mid-tier and small companies, it's terra incognita for them, and it's important to make them aware of what these terms mean. They have no foreign investors, they have no funding from abroad, and their first encounter with ESG is regulations. And in this regard, banks are their guiding spirits to the world of ESG covenants. Sber has an ESG policy implemented since last year, and we see ourselves as a driver of change, and we suggest that our clients include ESG covenants in their contracts, and this is becoming more and more popular among our clients. What kinds of ESG covenants do we have? We are dealing with a wide range of companies, and many of them are not quite clear what this is about. That is why we adopted a wide range of wordings in ESG. It might be a requirement to develop a human rights policy or anti-discrimination policy, and a requirement to disclose such a policy, or an ESG covenant might require some clear metrics like reducing the emissions or preventing leaks. Large companies are our clients as well, and in these cases, we consider the existing commitments to propose ESG covenants. For example, if a company is already pledged on some ESG targets, its performance might be included in the contract as an ESG covenant. When we want to have some figures in ESG covenant metrics, which we cannot measure, we include a verification audit in the list of requirements, which stimulates independent audit market in Russia. We believe that such step is a step forward to more transparent disclosures. Let me remind you that covenants are not mandatory. Every client may decide to include them to exclude them from the contract. And so far, they do not give substantial preferences. But as a bank, we do our best to promote green loans, ESG-related loans. And we believe that such covenants are a PR tool on one hand, and a tool to promote sustainability agenda on the other hand. And we are pleased to say that regional companies ventured to include covenants in their loan contracts. Speaking of future, we see that ESG covenants are a very useful tool. It might evolve from a compulsory tool to an instrument to regulate and mitigate risks. And in the future, we believe that these covenants might become obligatory, helping to reduce the loan rate for those who volunteer to include covenants in their loan contracts. I tried to be brief and to talk on the essence of the subject. Thank you very much, Ivan. I think that many took notes listening to you. We see a lot of companies becoming increasingly interested in sustainability-related funding. Both large and small companies. Responsible spending is also means to participate in sustainability agenda. And in a time, we believe that banks will be more involved in that. That is absolutely true. Now we are making a review to understand how risk management impacts risks related to loans. And I believe that over this and the next years, we will return with some proposals to the banking community to improve this estimate. Thank you very much, Ivan, for your speech. I think this is kind of gives hope. Thank you very much to everyone, and we are sorry for overrunning our time. We'll be soon back in an hour with our second session, which will start 1:30 Russian time. We will talk about business and regions and ESG strategies. It's going to be amazing. We're going to discuss a hot subject. Now, Dennis is going to launch a short video to show business transformation in the region of Lipetsk, and we're eager to see you back. We want to see you back at our second session.
Lipetsk region, a region in the center of the European part of Russia. The region is located in close proximity to Moscow, and the country's most important transport arteries pass through it: federal highways M4 Don and P22 Caspian. The ports of St. Petersburg, the Black Sea, and the EU border are 1,000 kilometers away. The average annual freight turnover of railway transport is 8,600 million tons. Lipetsk region is one of the leading regions of the Russian Federation in terms of investment attractiveness. According to the Quality of Life rating, the region is among the top 10. There are excellent opportunities for implementing projects in the fields of industry, agriculture, and food. Many well-known companies appreciated the advantages of investment opportunities and found a reliable and successful partner in the Lipetsk region. We provide investors with a large selection of technologically equipped platforms, special economic zone, industrial parks, brownfield, technology parks. In industrial and production clusters, there are 11 directions for creating clusters on the territory of the Lipetsk region. The industry of the region produces competitive products exported to more than 120 countries of the world. Italy, Germany, Ukraine, China, Poland, Netherlands, Brazil. We are one of the first regions in Russia to launch an export accelerator. We have something to offer the investor. The investor receives project support, state support, tax benefits, customs benefits, qualified workers and management personnel, developed banking infrastructure and modern technologies. Our experience in working with projects, the speed and quality of their execution and implementation, a comfortable environment for investors, all this guarantees the success of your business. Lipetsk region is open for your business. Department of Investment and Innovation of the Lipetsk region.